The night sky above Veldris 7 was always the same dull orange color, filled with dust and the distant glow of 3 small moons that gave barely enough light to see by. And Lieutenant Danny Cole had grown used to the emptiness of this forgotten mining colony on the edge of known space. He had been stationed here for 11 months now, watching over miners who dug deep into the rocky ground searching for Xytherium ore, a rare mineral that powered starships across the Galactic Union. And every day felt exactly like the one before it. Danny was 29 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much boring patrol duty. And he often wondered if anyone back on Earth even remembered that humans worked on this distant rock. The colony had only 200 people, mostly miners and a handful of support staff, and they lived in prefabricated buildings that groaned whenever the wind picked up. Outside the night, Danny walked along the eastern ridge with his scanner in hand, checking for any signs of illegal mining activity or equipment failures. Though he knew he would find nothing unusual, because nothing unusual ever happened on Veldris 7. That changed when the sky split open above him. A streak of silver fire tore through the orange clouds like a blade cutting through fabric. And Danny stopped in his tracks as the ground beneath his feet began to shake. The object, whatever it was, screamed through the atmosphere with a sound that hurt his ears, and he watched it slam into the canyon about 3 kilometers from where he stood. The impact sent a shockwave rolling across the ground that knocked him off his feet. And when he stood up again, he could see a column of smoke rising from the crash site. His radio crackled with confused voices from the colony, asking what had happened. And Danny knew he should report in and wait for backup before investigating. Instead, he started running toward the canyon. Something pulled at him, a feeling in his chest that he could not explain, like a voice calling out to him without words. And his feet carried him faster than they had ever moved before. When he reached the edge of the canyon and looked down into the smoking crater below, his mind struggled to understand what his eyes were seeing. His mind struggled to understand what his eyes were seeing. A creature lay broken among the twisted remains of what looked like a ship made entirely of crystal. And this creature was unlike anything Danny had ever seen or imagined. It was serpentine in shape, easily 30 meters long from its massive head to its tail, with scales that seemed to shift between deep black and rich purple as the light touched them. Great wings lay crumpled beneath its body, torn and burned from the crash, and 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows of 3 flickered with a faint glow that was growing weaker with each passing moment. A dragon, Danny thought to himself, because there was no other word in any human language that could describe what lay before him. He scrambled down the rocky slope of the crater, sliding on loose stones and cutting his hands on sharp edges. But he did not stop until he stood beside the creature. Up close, he could see the wounds that covered its body, deep gashes that leaked a fluid that glowed faintly blue, and he could hear the labored sound of its breathing as it fought to stay alive. The dragon's eyes, all 6 of them, turned to look at him, and then something happened that Danny would never be able to fully describe to anyone who asked. Creature's mind touched as it was not words exactly, more like feelings and images that poured into his head like water filling an empty cup. And Danny gasped as he felt the pain and fear and desperate hope that flooded through this strange connection. He saw flashes of memory that did not belong to him, images of stars being born and dying, of worlds covered in forests of crystal, of creatures like this one soaring through the void between galaxies. He saw war and death and the hunting of a species across 1,000 star systems by an enemy that showed no mercy. And beneath all of this, he felt a plea, a single desperate request from a dying mother who had nothing left to give except her trust. Danny should have been afraid, should have pulled back from this alien presence in his mind. But instead he found himself stepping closer to the dragon. "I can feel you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I can hear you," the dragon, whose name came to him through their connection as Sirith, sent another wave of images and emotions into his mind. She was the last of her kind, the final survivor of a species called the Drethin that had once been the guardians of life across countless galaxies. An enemy called the Vex. Dominion had hunted her people to extinction over thousands of years, and Sirith had fled for decades trying to protect the only thing that mattered to her anymore: 17 eggs. The last clutch her species would ever produce. Rested inside her dying body. Without a host to carry them, they would die when she did. And 10,000 years of searching had never found a species compatible with the Drethin bond. Every other race had failed, their bodies rejecting the eggs, their minds breaking under the weight of Drethin consciousness. And Sirith had almost given up hope of ever finding someone who could carry her legacy forward. When she reached out to touch Danny's mind, she expected the same failure she had encountered so many times before, but Danny's mind reached back to her something in human biology, something in the way their species had evolved on their distant blue world, made them different from every other race the Drethin had tested, where others broke. Danny bent and adapted and held firm. Sirith felt tears she did not know she could still produce running down her scaled face as she understood what this meant. "You are asking me to carry them," Danny said out loud, though he knew she could hear his thoughts. "To keep them safe." The dragon sent one final image into his mind, a vision of what could be if he said yes, of dragons soaring through human skies, of her children growing strong and free, of a bond between species that would change the galaxy forever. She also showed him the danger, the Vex who would come hunting for him, the pain of the bonding process, the weight of carrying the hopes of an entire species on his shoulders. She gave him the choice, because that was the only gift she had left to give. Danny looked into those 6 fading eyes and saw not a monster or an alien, but a mother who had given everything to protect her children. He thought of his own mother back on Earth, of the lengths she had gone to keep him safe when he was young, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. "I will carry them," he said. "I will keep them safe, I promise you." Sirith closed her eyes, and the bonding began. The pain that tore through Danny's body was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and he screamed into the night sky of Veldra 7 as Sirith's essence flowed into him like liquid fire. The eggs moved first, 17 small spheres, no larger than marbles, that burrowed through his skin and traveled through his body until they found their places around his heart and along his spine. Each one sent waves of agony through his nervous system as it settled into position. But Danny gritted his teeth and refused to fall because he had made a promise. Then came something far more powerful than the eggs, Irath's life force. Her memories, her power, everything that made her who she was began pouring through their bond. And into Danny's very cells, he saw millions of years of history flash before his eyes in the span of seconds. Felt the joy of flying through nebulas and the sorrow of watching loved ones fall to Vex weapons. His body began to change at the deepest level, his DNA rewriting itself to accommodate this ancient power that now lived inside him. His bones grew denser and stronger. His muscles developed new fibers that could generate far more force than any human had ever produced. And his senses expanded until he could hear the heartbeat of a small creature hiding in the rocks, 50 meters away. The process should have killed him. Sirith had told him through their bond that every other species had burned out during the transfer, their minds unable to handle the flood of Drethin consciousness, their bodies rejecting the changes as foreign invaders. But Danny did not burn out. His body fought and adapted and changed and accepted, bending like a tree in a storm rather than breaking like stone under pressure. When the transfer was finally complete, Danny lay on the ground beside Sirith, his chest heaving and his skin covered in sweat that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Sirith's eyes opened one final time, and she looked at him with something that felt like pride and love and hope all mixed together. "My children," she whispered directly into his mind, her voice growing fainter with each word. "My legacy, you carry them now. You carry us all. I will not fail them," Danny said out loud, reaching out to place his hand on her great-scaled head. "I will not fail you." Sirith let out a long breath that stirred the dust around them. And then the light faded from her 6 eyes, and she was gone. Danny lay there for a long time, his hand still resting on the body of the last true Drethin, feeling the eggs pulse gently around his heart like tiny second heartbeats. When the sun rose over the canyon, Dr. Katie Lynn found him there. Katie was the colony's chief medical officer, a woman in her mid-30s with black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been searching for Danny since he failed to respond to radio calls during the night, and when she saw him lying beside the massive dragon corpse, she nearly dropped her medical kit. "Danny," she shouted as she scrambled down into the crater. "Danny, can you hear me? What happened? What is this thing?" Danny tried to respond, but his body would not cooperate, and he slipped into unconsciousness before he could say a single word. He woke up 3 days later in the colony's small medical bay with Katie standing over him and looking at a scanner display with an expression of complete disbelief on her face. "You should be dead," she said when she noticed his eyes were open. "By every measurement I can take, you should have died about 100 times over in the past 3 days. Danny sat up slowly, surprised by how strong he felt, despite everything that had happened, and looked down at his hands. They looked the same as before, but he could feel the power thrumming beneath his skin, waiting to be called upon. "What did your scans find?" he asked, his voice rough from 3 days without water. Katie pulled up a holographic display that showed his internal organs and pointed at the cluster of small objects surrounding his heart. 17 foreign bodies that my equipment cannot identify. New structures growing throughout your nervous system, and DNA sequences that do not exist anywhere in our genetic database. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and fascination in her eyes. "Your core temperature reached levels that should have cooked your brain, Danny, but instead of dying, you seem to have developed entirely new organs that I have never seen in any human being." Danny took a deep breath and told her everything. He told her about Sirith and the Drethin, about the eggs and the bond and the transfer of power, about the Vex Dominion that had hunted the dragons to extinction and would surely come looking for him. Now Katie listened without interrupting, her scientific mind working to process information that challenged everything she knew about biology and the universe. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Show me," she said simply. Danny was not sure what she meant at first, but then he understood and held up his hand. He focused on the fire that he could feel burning inside him, the violet flame that was the signature of Drethin power, and let just a small amount of it flow to his fingertips. Purple fire danced across his palm, casting strange shadows on the medical bay walls, and Katie's eyes went wide. "The Galactic Union considers humans to be one of the youngest and weakest species in known space," she said slowly. "They tolerate us because we are useful for mining and labor, but they do not see us as equals." She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers passing through the flame without being burned. "If what you are telling me is true, if the Drethin searched for 10,000 years and never found a compatible species until they found humans, that means something." Danny closed his hand and the fire disappeared. "It means we are different," he said. "It means we have something that no other species has." Katie nodded and pulled up his scan results again. "Your body is still changing," she said, "still adapting and growing and becoming something new, and I have no idea where it will stop or what you will become when it finishes." Danny thought about the eggs pulsing around his heart, about Sirith's final words, about the promise he had made to a dying mother. "Whatever I become," he said, "I have to be ready because the Vex are coming." He did not know how right he was in The cold darkness between stars, a Vex warfleet was already changing course. Their sensors having detected the unmistakable energy signature of Drethan life on an insignificant human mining colony, Commander Celis. Krem stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled a cold smile as he gave the order to proceed at maximum speed. He had hunted dragons for 300 years and personally watched the last of them die. At Ashara Prime now, his sensors told him that somehow, impossibly, new Drethan signatures were appearing on a world at the edge of nowhere. Would not allow this mistake to be corrected by anyone but himself. 6 weeks passed on Veldra 7, and Danny used every single day to learn what he had become. The power inside him grew stronger with each sunrise, and he spent hours in the empty canyons away from the colony testing the limits of his new abilities. The Drethan fire came easier now, flowing from his hands in controlled streams or erupting from his body in waves of violet energy that melted rock and turned sand to glass. He could move faster than his eyes could track, crossing 100 meters in the time it took a normal man to blink. And his strength had grown to the point where he could lift mining equipment that normally required machines to move, but the physical changes were only part of what he had. Gained Cyrith's memories continued to integrate with his own, filling his dreams with visions of ancient battles and lost civilizations, and he found himself knowing things that no human had ever known. He remembered the height of the Drethan civilization when they had been guardians of peace across countless star systems, and he remembered their fall when the Vex rose to power and began their campaign of extermination. Most importantly, he remembered why the Vex feared the dragons so deeply. The Drethan had been more than powerful warriors. They had been the balance that prevented any single species from dominating the cosmos through force and tyranny. When the last of the great dragons fell, the Vex had swept across the galaxy like a plague, conquering and enslaving and destroying anyone who stood against them. Danny understood now that Cirith had given him more than her children. She had given him a purpose. Katie became his closest confidant during those 6 weeks, helping him understand the changes in his body and keeping his secret from the rest of the colony. She ran tests every day, documenting the impossible transformation happening inside him. And her scientific curiosity slowly gave way to something deeper. The eggs are growing, she told him one evening as they sat on the ridge overlooking the colony. They are drawing nutrients from your body and developing faster than I would have thought possible. Danny placed his hand over his heart where he could feel the 17 tiny lives pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. She told me they would hatch when the time was right, he said. I think they are waiting for something. Katie looked up at the orange sky and the distant stars that were beginning to appear as the sun set. Do you think the Vex will really come? She asked quietly before Danny could answer. His enhanced senses detected something that made his blood run cold. Ships, many ships, dropping out of faster than light travel at the edge of the star system. They are here, he said, standing up and letting the violet fire flicker across his skin. Katie, you need to get everyone into the deep mines where they will be safe. The Vex warfleet appeared on the colony's sensors. Minutes later, 12 massive warships arranged in attack formation and heading directly for the planet. Commander Silas Kren broadcast his ultimatum on all frequencies, his cold voice echoing through every speaker in the colony. Humans of Veldra 7, you are harboring stolen Drethan biological material within one of your people. Surrender this individual immediately, and you will be allowed to live. Refuse and your colony will be reduced to ash. Panic spread through the miners as they heard the message, and many of them looked to Danny with fear in their eyes. Greg Harper, a grizzled mining foreman with gray hair and hands scarred from decades of hard work, pushed his way through the crowd and stood before Danny. I have known you for almost a year now, Greg said in his rough voice. You are a good man who has never done anything but help the people on this rock. So tell me straight, What is really going on here? Danny took a deep breath and told them about the dragon, about the bond, about the eggs growing inside him and the power that now flowed through his veins. He told them about the Vex and their hatred of the Drethin and their determination to finish what they started 10,000 years ago when he finished. The miners stood in shocked silence, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. So you are telling us, Greg said slowly, that you are carrying baby dragons inside. You and an alien armada wants to kill you for it. Danny nodded. Greg was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed. A deep rumbling sound that seemed completely out of place given the situation. Well, that is definitely the strangest thing I have heard in 50 years of mining, he said. But I will tell you something, son. I did not come all the way out to the edge of nowhere, just to hand over one of our own to some alien bullies. He turned to face the other Myers. Who is with me? He shouted. Are we going to let these Vex take our friend, or are we going to show them what humans are made of? The response surprised Danny. One by one, the miners stepped forward, grabbing tools and equipment that could serve as weapons, their fear transforming into defiance. We will hold the tunnels, Greg said, turning back to Danny. You do whatever it is you need to do. Danny felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the Drethin fire. These people barely knew him. They had no reason to risk their lives for him. And yet they were choosing to stand and fight rather than surrender. This was what made humans different. He realized not their strength or their speed or any physical attribute, but their ability to come together and protect their own even when the odds were impossible. He walked out of the colony's main building and onto the landing platform where the first Vex dropships were already descending through the atmosphere. The violet fire erupted from his body as he stood there, wreathing him in flames that cast dancing shadows across the platform. And he spoke words that would be recorded by every sensor in the system. You hunted them because you were afraid. He called out to the ships above. And you should have been, but you made a mistake. You killed them all before you found out what happens when a Drethin bonds with a human. The first Vex soldiers emerged from their dropships. Tall, gray-skinned warriors in black armor carrying weapons that crackled with deadly energy. Let me show you what you missed, Danny said, and then he moved. The Vex soldiers never had a chance. The battle for Veldris 7 began with fire and fury as Danny tore through the first wave of Vex soldiers like a storm given human form. He moved so fast that the enemy could barely track him, appearing in one place and then another in the blink of an eye, leaving trails of violet flame wherever he went. His fists shattered armor that was designed to withstand energy weapons, and the Drethin fire that poured from his hands melted through Vex battle shields like they were made of paper. The soldiers fell by the dozens, their screams echoing across the landing platform as Danny showed them exactly what happened when the power of an ancient race merged with human determination. But there were thousands of them, dropship after dropship descending from the warfleet above. And Danny knew he could not be everywhere at once. In the tunnels beneath the colony, the miners fought their own desperate battle. Greg Harper had organized them into teams, using their knowledge of the underground passages to set traps and ambush that the Vex never saw coming. Mining charges brought down tunnel ceilings on advancing soldiers. Ore haulers modified with welding lasers cut through enemy armor. And the workers of Veldris 7 proved that humans would not go quietly even when facing a superior. Forskady stayed in the medical bay, treating the wounded and coordinating communications between the scattered groups of defenders, her voice steady even as explosions shook the walls around her. When a squad of Vex assassins breached the medical bay's defenses, she did not hesitate. She grabbed a mining laser from the table beside her and fired twice, dropping two of the gray-skinned killers before they could raise their weapons. Nobody hurts my patients, she said through gritted teeth. Danny arrived moments later, smashing through the remaining assassins with strikes that sent them flying across the room. "You are supposed to stay safe," he said to Katie, his voice tight with worry. She looked at him with fire in her eyes that had nothing to do with Drethan power. "I am exactly where I need to be," she replied. "Now get back out there and finish this." The first day of fighting ended with the Vex having gained almost no ground, and Commander Kren watched from his flagship with growing frustration. He had expected to find a single contaminated human, weak and confused by the Drethan essence he had absorbed. But instead he had found a warrior who fought with the power of a dragon and the tactics of a soldier. Reports from the surface told of impossible speed, devastating fire attacks, and a human who seemed to heal from wounds that should have been fatal within minutes. Gren ordered more troops to the surface, 10 times as many as before, determined to overwhelm this unexpected resistance through sheer numbers. The second day was worse than the first. Danny fought without rest, his enhanced body requiring no sleep and his Drethan power seemingly without limit. But even he began to feel the strain as the Vex pressed their attack from every direction, and he found himself being pushed back toward the colony's central complex. Then, just after midnight, something changed. The pulse of warmth spread through Danny's chest, and he stopped in the middle of the battlefield, his eyes going wide. "No," he whispered. "Not now. Please, not now." But the eggs did not listen to his pleas. The first one hatched inside him, and the sensation of a tiny dragon emerging from the shell around his heart was both painful and beautiful. Beyond description, he felt the dragonling's mind touch his, young and confused but filled with ancient instinct. And then it somehow passed through his body and emerged from his chest in a flash of copper light. The newborn dragon was no larger than a house cat, with scales the color of burnished metal and eyes that held intelligence far beyond its size. It looked up at Danny, and he felt a bond form between them that was different from what he had shared with Cirith. Deeper somehow, like the connection between a parent and child. "Hello, little one," Danny said softly. The dragonling chirped and spread its tiny wings, and Danny felt his own power suddenly double in strength. He understood then what Cirith had meant about the Drethan bond being multiplicative, each dragon drawing strength from the others in a way that created something greater than the sum of its parts do. More eggs hatched before dawn, and then 4 more by noon. With each new dragon that emerged, Danny grew stronger, faster, more powerful. And the Vex began to realize that they were not fighting a single enemy, but a growing force that would soon be unstoppable. By the end of the second day, 7 dragons flew in formation around Danny, ranging from the first copper hatchling to a silver one that was already the size of a large dog. They fought together like they had been doing it for centuries, their minds linked through the bond they all shared. And the Vex advance crumbled before their combined assault commander. Kren watched the battle reports with something he had not felt in 300 years of hunting. Drethan had exterminated an entire species, had watched the last of the great dragons die under his guns, and he had believed that chapter of galactic history was closed forever. Now he was watching it begin again. And this time, the dragons had something they had never had before. They had humans. On the third morning, Kren gave the order that he had hoped to avoid. "Begin orbital bombardment," he said, his voice cold with barely controlled rage. "If we cannot capture the colony, then we will reduce it to glass." The war fleet began charging their main weapons, massive cannons capable of destroying cities with a single shot. And Danny looked up at the sky, knowing that his strength alone could not stop what was coming. Katie's voice crackled over his communicator. "Danny, we are picking up massive energy buildups from the Vex ships. They are going to fire on the colony." Danny looked at the 7 dragons circling above him, felt the 10 remaining eggs still pulsing around his heart, and made his decision. "Get everyone as deep underground as you can," he said. "I am going up there. He bent his knees and jumped, the Drethan fire erupting from his body and propelling him upward like a rocket. And the 7 hatchlings followed their father into the sky. The battle for Veldris 7 was about to enter its final phase. Danny rose through the atmosphere of Veldris 7 like a comet in reverse, violet fire streaming behind him as he climbed higher and higher toward the waiting Vex War fleet. 7 dragons flew with him in perfect formation, their young minds linked to his through bonds that pulsed with shared power and purpose. And together they broke through the final layer of clouds into the cold darkness of space. The Vex warships hung before them, like monuments of destruction. 12 massive vessels bristling with weapons that were already glowing with the energy of their bombardment charges. Commander. Kren watched from his command bridge as the human and his dragons appeared on his sensors. And for one brief moment, he felt something that might have been admiration. "He's brave," Kren said to his officers. "Foolish beyond measure, but brave." He gave the order to fire beams of devastating energy lanced out from the Vex ships, weapons capable of cracking continents and boiling oceans, all focused on a single human surrounded by creatures no larger than dogs. Danny did not try to match power with power. Instead, he used something the Drethan had never thought to employ because they had always fought alone, because their pride had never allowed them to rely on anything other than their own strength. He used human tactics. The asteroids of the Veldris system became his weapons as he grabbed chunks of rock with his enhanced strength and hurled them at the enemy ships, using the debris as cover while he closed the distance. The dragons spread out in patterns he directed through their bond, drawing fire and creating distractions, while Danny targeted the weak points that Sareth's memories told him every Vex ship possessed. He did not try to overwhelm their shields with brute force. Instead, he struck at engines and weapon systems, crippling ships rather than destroying them, forcing them to choose between fighting and fleeing. The Vex had expected to face a force of nature, something powerful but predictable, and they had no idea how to handle an enemy who fought like a soldier while wielding the power of a dragon ship. After ship fell out of formation as Danny and his dragons tore through the fleet, and the bombardment that was supposed to destroy the colony fell apart as the vessels targeting it were forced to defend themselves on his command bridge. Kren watched his fleet being dismantled by a single human and 7 hatchlings, and the fear that had taken root in his heart began to grow into something like terror. He understood now what the Drethan had found in humanity, the quality that had eluded every other species they had tested over 10,000 years. Humans were not just physically compatible with the bond. They were mentally compatible in a way that no one could have predicted. They were adaptable, creative, stubborn beyond all reason. And most dangerous of all, they formed bonds of loyalty and love that made them willing to fight for each other against impossible odds. The dragons of old had been powerful but proud, fighting alone because they believed themselves above the need for allies. Danny fought with 7 dragons at his side, not because he commanded them, but because they loved him, because he had accepted Sareth's gift not for power, but out of compassion for a dying mother that made him more dangerous than any Drethan that had come before. Kren ordered all remaining ships to concentrate fire on the human, every weapon they had left pointing at a single target. Danny saw the attack coming through the eyes of his dragons, saw the devastating barrage that would surely destroy him if it connected, and he made a choice. He flew straight at the flagship. The violet fire around him intensified until he blazed like a small sun, and the dragons merged their power with his until the combined energy was almost too much for even his enhanced body to contain. He punched through the flagship shields like they were not even there, tore through 3 decks of armored hull, and emerged on the command bridge face to face with Commander Kren. "You hunt them for 300 years, Danny said, violet fire dancing in his eyes as he walked toward the Vex commander. You killed them until you thought there were none left. And you never once asked yourself what would happen if you were wrong. Kren drew his weapon, but Danny moved faster than thought and knocked it from his hand. Kill me then. Kren snarled. Finish what your precious dragons could never accomplish. Danny looked at this being who had spent centuries committing genocide, who had ordered the death of an entire species and would have done the same to the human colonists below. And he felt the rage burning inside him, demanding blood. But he also remembered Katie's face, Greg's defiant laughter. The miners who had stood beside him, even though they had nothing to gain and everything to lose, humans, did not become stronger by being more brutal than their enemies. They became stronger by being better. No, Danny said. You will live. You will go back to your dominion, and you will tell them what you saw here today. You will tell them that the dragons are not extinct, that they have found humanity, and that if the Vex come hunting again, they will face something worse than anything they have ever imagined. He grabbed Kren and threw him into an escape pod, then systematically destroyed the command bridge before the Vex could recover the remaining ships. Seeing their flagship crippled and their commander gone, began to retreat. Danny floated in the wreckage of the battle, the 7 dragons circling around him, and he watched the Vex fleet limp away toward the edge of the system. It was over. When he returned to the surface, the colonists were waiting for him, having emerged from the tunnels when the bombardment stopped, and they stared in wonder at the man who had just defeated an armada single-handed. Likety ran to him and threw her arms around his neck, not caring who saw, and Danny held her tight as the exhaustion of 3 days of constant fighting finally caught up with him. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. We did it, he corrected her. I could not have won without all of you holding the line. Greg Harper walked up and clapped Danny on the shoulder. So what happens now? The old miner asked. The whole galaxy is going to know about you after this. Danny looked up at the sky where the first ships of a Galactic Union investigation fleet were already appearing, drawn by the battle that had been witnessed by sensors across the sector. Now we show them who we really are, Danny said. In the weeks that followed, the story spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The tale of a human who had bonded with the last Drethan and defeated a Vex war fleet with nothing but 7 hatchlings in the support of a Mayan colonist species that had lived in fear of the Dominion for generations, began to whisper about hope, about change, about the possibility that the Vex might finally face an enemy they could not conquer. And on 100 human worlds, people looked up at the stars and wondered what else they might be capable of, what other powers they might wield, what other legacies they might carry forward. Danny stood on the ridge where he had first found Sirath, the dragon soaring through the sky above him, and Katie's hand warm in his own. She believed in us, Danny said softly. She was dying, and she still had hope that we could be the ones to stand against the darkness. He watched the dragons dance through the clouds, 17 now, as the remaining eggs had hatched during the celebration that followed the victory. And he felt Sarath's final gift pulsing through every fiber of his being. She was right. Above them the dragons roared in unison and violet fire lit the sky. And somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, a wounded Vex commander was carrying a message back to his master's humanity, had taken its first step toward the stars 200 years ago. Small and alone and unsure of their place in the universe, now they were taking their second step. And the galaxy would never be the same. The age of the dragon had ended. The age of humanity had just begun.